Well, hello there.
Hello there, PJ. How are you, sir?
I am fan freaking tastic. How are you?
I am well. I am well. It's Friday. That's always a good thing. Um, Both the teams I follow in football are 2-0. How are the Bears doing, by the way?
Mm, you like to stab deep, don't you? You want to start out and just trample me, and then we hopefully build me up by the end of the episode.
Exactly. You know what? This is about perseverance, and being a Chicago Bears fan is entirely about perseverance, is it not, PJ?
There's nothing like a good friend to kick you in the teeth when you're down. Thank you
That's
so
right.
much, Paul.
They were in Tampa Bay just last week. How
I
did that
know.
game end? Buddy, do you know? Who won that game?
But he doesn't care. He was watching the Eagles trounce whoever they played against. So that's good though, right? The Eagles are doing great.
Well, they barely won. They had a good game, but they only won by a few points at the end of the game there. So I wish they
PJ,
played
you know
Minnesota.
what PJ, you know what that's called when you win by only a few points?
No, we don't actually.
It's called winning.
I know.
Just winning.
I know.
Okay.
I know.
Yeah.
I knew where you're going, man. I know. We'll get there one day, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well,
Sure.
you know what? You had that era, the Jim McMahon era. Remember Jim McMahon? Man, was that
Dude,
like the last good Chicago Bears team that,
Yeah, basically. Well, no, we went to the
Wow.
Super Bowl with Rex.
Yeah,
Grossman.
that's right. Rex Grossman, University of Florida product.
I don't know if it's called
Very
a product
nice.
or he's a product. In other words, like there are better products. But anyway,
There are. And then he went to my Washington, then Redskins, now Commanders, who are also, for the record, 2-0.
Mm.
And he was not so good. Not so good.
yeah, he was never all that great. So it's amazing we went that far. Thanks for the old Lovey Smith's defense. But anyway, we're waxing.
Lovey Smith, he went to Tampa Bay after that and did okay for a minute. And then anyway, enough of that. Let's introduce our guest and talk business.
The Braving Business Podcast, sports.
Yes.
Well, you know what, buddy, very happy to have you on the show today. Very thrilled to introduce you because, first of all, you sound maybe like a G.I. Joe guy. I think you sound like a space cowboy out of a science fiction movie, right? Like, hey, when you get to that outpost, look up Buddy Jericho. He's going to help you out. I mean, it's a fantastic name.
It sounds like a pseudonym, doesn't it? It sounds like, like a name they'd give a spy. And it just so happens Buddy did work at the National Intelligence Agency. So, Buddy, is that your real name? Are you really Buddy Jericho? Tell us the truth.
I am Buddy Jericho, but actually my real first name is Harry. And going back 8 generations, I'm Harry Jericho the eighth, but every Harry Jericho has been given the nickname Buddy. And it's kind of funny growing up in Philadelphia. I'd go to the bar with my dad. That was kind of just something you did in the neighborhood I grew up. And as a kid, I thought I was the most famous.
Go to the
kid
bar
in
with your dad as a kid. Love it. Okay, that's
yeah,
Philadelphia for you right there.
Play shuffleboard, throw darts. Okay. Everybody in the bar would always say, "Hey, little buddy, come here." And so I thought I was the most popular kid in the city. And so I found out that they basically say that to every little kid. So
that's awesome. Well, PJ, complete your introduction. I'm sorry I interrupted you there.
No, that's fine. So after, Buddy grew up in bars, throwing darts, throwing punches, and then afterwards, he went to the U.S. Army. After the U.S. Army, he became an operations intelligence officer with the Defense Intelligence Agency before turning into an entrepreneur. But not just any entrepreneur. Buddy founded and was the CEO of Echo Analytics, which he sold to defense contractor Quiet Professionals Company, which just sounds very spyish. Anyway,
holy shit.
Yeah, it is
Quiet Professionals. You know where I work? I work with the Quiet Professionals.
Yeah,
that sounds badass. All right, sorry, go on.
Anyway, Echo Analytics delivers a range of highly reliable open source intelligence training, technology, and products through one single platform, primarily to federal agencies and local law enforcement. While he was launching and running Echo Analytics, Buddy also launched Skull Games, a 501c nonprofit that uses open source intelligence to identify victims of sexual exploitation, the predators abusing them, and other persons of interest by creating leads that enable law enforcement to interrupt the cycle of abuse and restore survivors of trauma to a life of hope, healing, and freedom. which is amazing. I can't wait to get into that. It's now in its 9th iteration. Skull Games has become an impactful tool in the arsenal used by law enforcement to help victims catch sex trafficking predators. So it's nuts. It's amazing. His entrepreneurial streak is very much intact. After selling Echo Analytics, he launched a new company, Indago. Is that right? Indigo?
That's right. Indago.
Okay.
Yeah.
My name is Indago Montoya. You have killed. No. Okay, go on.
You killed my father. A cloud-based intelligence report building platform, which offers intelligence analysts and business analysts tools to analyze massive amounts of data quickly and efficiently. So he's all about intelligence. This is why he and I never crossed
paths. He's a very intelligent guy as well.
That's what I was going to say. That's why. Buddy, it is a pleasure to have you on our Braving Business podcast. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, PJ, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you guys. When Tal reached out to me and told me he was starting a podcast, and then offered me to come on the podcast, I was extremely honored. So I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Well, and actually, to be perfectly honest, this is his podcast. I'm just like, I'm playing around.
Yeah. PJ likes to play small. PJ likes to pretend that he's a small cog in a big machine, but he is the machine. People do hear the advertisement on the front end of this, and they know that you are the one bringing them Braving Business. So let us come on. Let us. By the way, if you do need anything shipped, where would you go, PJ? Tell us.
Oh, come on. They already heard it.
Okay. All right. Buddy, it's great to see you again. You and I met a few years back. I was doing some consulting and was involved in what you were trying to do with Echo Analytics. You have a fascinating story. You, before becoming a soldier, you were a car mechanic. Nothing wrong with that. You turned an intelligence officer. You've turned to be an entrepreneur. And then in addition to that, you moonlight as the savior for people who've been victimized by sex trafficking. And you've also become the worst nightmare of sex traffickers. You don't just have an action hero name. You sort of live the life of one. Tell our listeners about yourself. How did you find yourself on this astonishing journey that's been your life?
Yeah, and just to be clear, on Skull Games, I didn't start that myself. That was a team effort, but it was a small group of us, and so I am still a part of Skull Games, but I wasn't the sole builder of that. Just to be clear, there was
none of us are the sole builders of anything, together. Right? I mean, it's a fair point. We've had other guests that have pointed that out. Fair enough, absolutely. We co-found, we build together. Acknowledged. yeah, no, I appreciate that. And so I had no intention of being where I am in life today. When I was in high school, I wasn't a very good student. I was always a visual learner. I'm a product of Philadelphia Public Schools. And so I never did well when people just told me things. I had to see them, and I didn't realize that until I went in the Army. And so at 18, I actually played a year of soccer in college, and I wasn't any better in college than I was in high school as a student. So I realized I had to do something, and I took this job as a mechanic, and I really enjoyed it. But I found myself one day looking around the shop, and I realized there's some 40, 50-year-old guys in the shop that I really don't want to be in 40 or 50 years. Not anything bad. I just didn't want to have that. I was never a routine sort of person. I wasn't a 9-to-5 guy, and I kind of knew that about myself at a young age. And so I went home and I explained that to my mom, and I said, well, I'm not a great student. I'm okay at soccer, and I don't really have a passion for being a mechanic. So, what are my options? And the Army came up, or service came up as one of the options. And so I went down and I took the test to join the Army. And I did really, really well in the test. And so I joined the Army, and I joined the Army actually before 9/11. And one of the things my recruiter told me is I could go to Germany as my first assignment. And I always wanted to travel. So I thought, this is a great opportunity. I'm going to get paid to learn something new, and I get to travel, and it's all on the government's dime. And so I joined the Army. I went to Germany, and I get to Germany. Within 3 months of being in Germany, they deploy me to Bosnia. And that was a really interesting experience for me. One, to learn about different cultures. And the interesting thing about Bosnia is my job in Bosnia was to protect Muslims from the Christians. And you can imagine, fast forward. Was that during the Bosnian Serb conflict?
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But while I was there, they stuck me on this, what they called a FOB, a forward operating base. And on this FOB, it was just a handful of people. And it was very boring. We just basically pulled security to protect the radio towers. And it was a propaganda counter information operations mission. And so I run into this lady who was walking her goats every day, and I struck up a conversation with her. I'm a pretty outgoing person. I think I'm probably more extroverted than introverted. And come to find out, they have all these soccer stadiums in the area that have been blown up during the war, and her son plays soccer. And so, so I said to her, I'd love to kick the ball around with your son. That led to me playing soccer with her son, which led to me finding a bunch of other kids in the area. So I basically launched this soccer league in what they called the zone of separation, and turned into kind of a big thing. But
the lesson for our audience there is just talk to people with goats. I think we start there.
That's exactly right.
And build from there. Okay, just
yeah.
Want to make sure our audience did not miss that.
No, and it was cool because that was my first introduction to human intelligence, and that wasn't my intention. But just by being me and getting along with this person and building this league, by the time I was done, I think we had like 16 soccer teams playing in this league. The community started rebuilding these stadiums. We had governors from these districts coming to these games. And so unintentionally, what it did is it provided an opportunity for, coalition forces, for the American forces to begin building relationships with the locals. But the cool thing for me is this was the first time I was really exposed to a culture outside of ours here in America. And so a lot of lessons learned there, just, the way they rationalized, the way they thought about things, the way they approach things, their feelings were very, very similar to ours here in America. And so I started to realize, what I read in books and what I got in briefs was not really representative of who these people actually were. They were a lot like me, and I had a lot more in common with them than differences. And so I finished that tour. I left Bosnia. The soccer league was well intact. I'm still blown away by the fact that I played soccer against these guys that were in their 50s that could chain smoke during the game and still outrun me and drink rakia on the sidelines. And the most fit people I've ever in better shape I was at 21, and these guys were in their 50s and very good at soccer, by the way, very, very good at soccer. And so I left that assignment. I come back to the States. I get assigned to the 101st Airborne Division. I'm an intel guy, by the way, there. And then 9/11 happens. And 9/11 obviously changed for a lot of people. So I wasn't one of the folks that joined the Army because of 9/11. I was already in the Army. But while I was at Fort Campbell, I got a notification that I was being assigned to a new unit. I thought for sure they were sending me to be a recruiter, because that's typically what you get sent to DC or somewhere else to do halfway through your assignment. So I told the Army I wasn't going to do it. I said, no, I'm getting out. I'm going to be a cop in Philadelphia. I actually went and took the police test to become a cop. And then my branch manager in the Army called me and said, Buddy, it's not a recruitment assignment. But we can't tell you what it's going to be, but I really think you should look into this job. And so that got me into the world of human intelligence. It got me into the world of special operations. And so I transitioned to a new position up in the DC area. And a few months later, I was deployed to Iraq. I spent, I think I did 14 deployments to Iraq over the next 12 years, which you can imagine was tough on my family.
14 deployments.
Yeah, 14 deployments. Now, just to be fair, these weren't like 1 year deployments. These were 3 and 4 month deployments, but they were back to back. And that got me into the world of human intelligence. And so a lot of the skills I learned as a kid growing up in the streets of Philadelphia, a lot of the skills I learned in Bosnia really, really helped me in my journey to becoming a human intelligence officer. And by the way, I didn't plan for any of this. It's kind of interesting how things just started to fall into place. And I moved into that world. So I left the Army. I became a government employee and, did those deployments. And then in 2012, I was kind of spent. I was very tired. The Army, the wars were starting to die down. We were pulling out of Iraq. And I was actually having dinner with my wife, and my daughter had turned 10. This was in 2012. She turned 10 years old. And she's telling all these stories at the dinner table, and I'm not remembering half of the stories. And so I told my wife, I said, I don't know what she's talking about half of these stories. And she said, you've only been home for 2 Christmases, and I think you've missed all but like 3 birthdays in 10 years. And so I realized, I can't stay on this path. I've got to find something else. And at the time, the government wanted to send me to another country in Southeast Asia to continue my work with them. And there was no way I was getting my wife and 3 little girls to move to Southeast Asia, to the country they wanted to send me to. And I was only 37 years old. So I decided, you know what? I want to do something different. I don't want to just be a defense contractor the rest of my life. And I always wanted to take a shot at business, because I grew up around a lot of entrepreneurs in Philadelphia, that went off and started their own little small businesses. Nothing in the tech space. These are like corner bars or, newspaper stands or selling pretzels on the highway, but, very entrepreneurial spirit in terms of getting into business. And so as I look
First,
back,
I gotta say, buddy, I'm sorry to interrupt you. One really interesting thing you said that I think just reinforces that people who serve are just a different breed. You said, I was exhausted, so I decided to become an entrepreneur. I mean, think about it. Think about it. For a lot of the people in the audience who've not served, and I have not served, I'm very blessed to have a daughter that's serving in the Navy now. But for a lot of people, being an entrepreneur would be something to need rest from. And for you, given what you were doing for your country, which we appreciate greatly,
thank you.
That was a respite. So that says something.
Well, I will tell you, at the time, I had no idea what I was getting into and being an entrepreneur. So
I bet
you're right. Being an entrepreneur is absolutely exhausting as well, but it's a different type of exhaustion, right? There's the exhaustion of traveling, and just going to bed at night and not knowing if you're going to wake up, being out on missions where you're chasing some of the worst of the worst in the world. And that was part of my job, was essentially chasing some of the most wanted people on the planet at the time. So there's a lot of exhaustion that comes with that. Being an entrepreneur is exhausting as well, but it's sort of a different type of exhaustion, I think.
For sure.
But like I said,
I mean, all kidding aside, I absolutely mean it when I say the people that serve are a different breed. I mean, they're just a different breed, and I mean that with the utmost respect and admiration.
I appreciate that, and I agree with you.
Yeah.
And so I decided, I'm going to take a shot at business. I had no idea what I was doing, but I looked back and I said, well, there's nothing I've done in my life up until this point that I've completely failed at. There's also nothing I've done in my life that I've done completely, better than anybody else either. But I figured at 37 years old, it's worth a shot. Let me get into business. And something a lot of people don't understand that I sort of realized at the time was, I always envy those, the guys in their 20s or the gals in their 20s that get out and start these businesses. And I thought, for me to start a business, I'm 37 years old. I've got these very unique skill sets. I've got, the government's probably spent millions of dollars training me to do what I did. And if I go into business and I completely fail, I still can go be a defense contractor. I can still go back to the government. So I had a plan B and a plan C, and in some cases a plan D. And so actually jumping into the world of entrepreneurship for veterans, and for me at the time, was not nearly as risky as I think it sounds on the surface. And one of the other things I learned when I jumped into the entrepreneurial world, which fascinated me and really kind of drives my passion today, one of my passions, is that after World War II, and I understand there's a lot of variables here, so it's not a black and white one-for-one thing, but after World War II, over 55% of small businesses in America were owned by veterans. And in today's world, that number is less than 2%. And so in my brain, I was just like, what has changed so much that veterans are so hesitant?
Well, there's no draft for one thing. So a lot more people were veterans. True. But PJ, go ahead. I see you're jumping in with your first question. Go.
No. I mean, it's fascinating, right? Like this whole story. First of all, thank you for your service, to echo Tal. It's fantastic. I was going to say though that obviously everything that I'm hearing is that you have this huge heart, right? You're coming in with a lot of empathy and a lot of curiosity about different cultures and different people that you're working with. And this your journey into entrepreneurship obviously is a new step for you, but you're using all this background that you have of law enforcement and the intelligence for that. But you also are getting into a realm that people hear about, but we don't, the everyday American doesn't see, or hopefully doesn't see, which is all this sex trafficking. Like, how did you get into that? Like, what took you there?
That's a great question. And so while I was still in the government, when you're hunting terrorists or you're hunting bad guys, inevitably you're going to come across things outside. It's not just that guys put on suicide vests and go blow mosques up or blow churches up. They've got to fund their operations. And so one of the ways in which they fund their operations is through, sex trafficking. And so a lot of I shouldn't say a lot, but a good majority of the operations I was involved in, it was rescuing kids that had been kidnapped or rescuing girls that were being used as sex slaves to fund the terrorist operation. Now, I knew that was a big deal outside the US, right? And so I never thought that here in the United States that was an issue, but it was an issue overseas. And so actually in 2012, when I started my first company and kind of got into my, service or philanthropic work, I worked with a ministry that does have safe houses overseas where they do help some of these people. But a good friend of mine, Jeff Teagues, he brought to my attention that, hey, buddy, this just isn't an issue overseas. This is actually a pretty big issue here in the United States as well. And so when I learned about how big of an issue it is actually here in the United States, in our own backyards, in our own cities, that kind of got me to really focusing, not to take anything away from doing things internationally, but I also realized we've got to do something here at home. And by the way, this is where my 3 daughters live, right? So it's literally close to home for me. And so I've always had this thing with business. In my first business, I worked my butt off like most entrepreneurs do, day and night, before you realize that, hey, it's okay to give tasks to other people. It's okay to not be married to this business. And, you get into that lifestyle business mindset in your first business. And I had to touch everything, see everything, be a part of everything. And as you get more mature and make a lot of mistakes, you realize, well, that's not necessarily the way it's got to be. And then you see these guys like Elon Musk, who is the CEO of multiple companies. You're like, there's no way that guy is doing what I did when I started my business and this successful. So he's learned the skill of tasking. He's learned the skill of hiring solid people that can take on some of this stuff. And so I've always had this void in my heart with in my first business. I worked so hard at the business that I got away from the service component of what I was really passionate about. And I realized very quickly that if I'm not dedicating some of my time to giving back, I'm not going to be very good in business. And I'm not going to be very good in my business endeavors if I'm not giving back. And so I learned that there has to be a balance between those two for me. And I'm not saying that's for everybody, but for me, I had to have both of those things, the fulfilling of those two things to keep me going and keep me motivated and keep me driven. And so, yeah, so that's why I got into the counter sex trafficking space here in the US. And I'm very passionate about it. So I've learned as much as I can about it. I've built a lot of great relationships. And so the thing Skull Games does today is pretty incredible. And when we actually started Skull Games, it was really small. It was relatively small. I think we had 8 volunteers the first time. And once the word got out about our mission and what we were trying to accomplish, it just started to grow. So I'll kind of just give you a good example of what Skull Games brings to the table for law enforcement and to average people. Think about it this way. So in certain cities across the country, I won't get into specific cities for obvious reasons, but in some cities, they have major sex trafficking issues. But what you'll find is on their sex trafficking task forces or the officers assigned to investigate those cases is relatively small. For example, the NCMEC, the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children, which is a well-known nonprofit in the counter sex trafficking space, they receive over 30 million tips a year, 30 million tips a year of children being sexually assaulted, exploited, or abused. Less than 1% of those tips are actually investigated, and a small portion of those are actually prosecuted. Very small portion of that are actually prosecuted. And so what we realized in these cities, they have 1 or 2 officers assigned to these sex trafficking crimes. And so in some major cities, they have hundreds of cases. 2 officers, 3 officers are never going to get to all those cases. And so with Skull Games, what we realized is we leveraged our network to bring together, former law enforcement officers, former intelligence professionals. And so in the Skull Games task force, what we do is essentially we surge for 3 days, 2.5 days, and we bring the resources of all of those volunteers who, by the way, the government has probably spent millions of dollars training during their time with the government or with law enforcement. We bring all of those resources, or we attempt to bring all those resources to bear for a police department in any city in America. And so you can imagine those two officers that are just overwhelmed with these cases. All of a sudden, for 3 days, a team of 60, 70 people show up at their doorstep and say, hey, we're here to provide you technology, research, and all these other resources to help you crack some more of these cases. And so that's
I got to say, I had the
the
incredible privilege. Buddy, when I was working with Buddy, invited me to a conference, and at that conference, a woman stood up at the podium, and you talk about a room with hundreds of people, maybe over 1,000, and she had been a victim of sexual trafficking, and was rescued through the efforts of Buddy and people like Buddy. And her life had been transformed. I believe that she was working for you at the time, or may still be. And it was utterly mesmerizing. I mean, the entire audience, you could hear a pin drop as this woman talked about a life of total abuse, feeling devoid of value, and then being saved. And there's a saying in the Jewish tradition, which is that if you've saved a single life, it's if you've saved the world entire. I'm sorry, I get emotional every time I say that. And Buddy, you are a hero, because you've saved a lot of lives, both while in service and since. That's hugely humbling to be in the presence of that. So I just want to acknowledge that. I'm going to pivot. Let's talk business for a minute. You mentioned when we talked, obviously you and I have talked offline, but in the pre-interview, you talked about that business for you was a series of learning and failure. Talk to our audience about that. What does it mean to you? Maybe you could share a specific setback or something you learned. And what did you make of that? I mean, I would imagine doing what you did in the military and with the National Intelligence Agency. Failing is probably a thing you run into with regularity. You just can't win them all. How did you apply that to business, and what epiphany, if any, did you have about either the similarities or the differences between doing it where you were doing it and doing it as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I actually keep on my iPhone, I keep a list of all my mistakes. And if you were to get on my phone and scroll to the bottom of those mistakes, it'd probably take you a good 2-3 minutes. So I've made
my phone would be completely out of memory. Just so
yeah, I'm pretty close. I've got a lot more mistakes to make, so I'm going to catch up to you, PJ. Give me a year or two. But when I first came into business, I knew nothing about it. As a matter of fact, I didn't even know how to set up an LLC when I started my first business. And so even that was a challenge for me initially, just learning what is an LLC. And then I realized, well, there's, after I started my company, there's all these other corporations, or there's all these other ways you could have set up, like a C Corp, an S Corp. And so every day I was learning something new. Where I think I was fortunate is I was lucky enough to have people around me early on who acted as my mentors. Now, they didn't give me the answers to all the questions on the test, but they were there for me to reach out. And I've always had a hard time asking people for help. That's one of the things I really had to get past as an entrepreneur is, there are genuinely people out there that want to see you be successful. There are people that genuinely care about you. But at the same time, there are genuinely people out there that see opportunity in you and aren't there to see you be successful, that they want to leverage you to further their own business goals. And so differentiating between the two is kind of tough when you just get into this world. Where I was lucky is I spent a lot of time in the government, where the government paid me to understand the difference between the two, not in the same regard, but sort of similarly. And so I was fortunate enough to where the mistakes I made were, some of the mistakes I made were minimal. I mean, I've made some big mistakes where we've spent $400,000 or $500,000 building a piece of technology that never left the shelf. There were mistakes like that, but I had a friend once tell me that I was getting an education that I could not get in any classroom. He said, you could go get an MBA, you would never learn this stuff. And he said, so every mistake you make, every dollar you lose in your entrepreneurial journey, chalk that up to tuition, because you're paying for an education you can't get in the classroom. So that helped. That helped me a little bit. But I think some of the bigger mistakes I've made is moving too fast, right? So, for instance, when I sold my first company, and Tal knows this story a little bit. When I sold my first company, we were at a place where we were doing really well. Our pipeline was solid. Our P-win rate for those opportunities was very good. And we managed to operate in a very lean manner. Most people worked from home. I always paid very, very close attention to the P&L. But then we had a buyer come to us or reach out to us that we engaged, and they were ready to buy us. So, of course, for me, I looked through this through colored lenses, and everybody on my team was excited about it. So I sort of blew past a lot of the small print that I should have paid attention to when you're going through an acquisition. And that's not that company tried to pull one over on me. That was mostly my fault. That's on me. It's my responsibility to read those things. And so I agreed to some things that I probably wouldn't have agreed to if I would have taken the time to read the small print. But I was so excited about the fact that our company was growing. We were pivoting from services to technology, which is, most people listening to this podcast know, is not an easy thing to do. And so now you're going to get all these additional resources. You're going to get all this additional support to do that. My team was excited. And so the acquisition was sort of became an afterthought before the acquisition occurred. I was so laser focused on what we're doing post-acquisition. And I have some regrets about that. But at the same time, had I not gone through that pain and had some of that not caught up to me post-acquisition, I would have been forced to go back and really teach myself some of these things. For instance, I couldn't even read a term sheet when we were first acquired. I didn't know what a liquidation preference was. I didn't know what half of the terms on the sheet were, but I just thought, everybody's trying to do the right thing. We're all on the same team. So a lot of lessons learned there. And so I'll
say, when I came into your orbit, those mistakes were in your rearview mirror, and you were living with the consequences of those mistakes. I remember reviewing them with you, and I was impressed with your candor. We were sitting at the table. There was another investor there. Buddy was the CEO. Very serious money is being discussed. And Buddy's very transparent about, I agreed to this, and it's been really holding me back. And then there's this issue. And I'd say two things about that stood out for me. One, clearly the most important value you had was your integrity. And I would say that anyone listening, that you have to start there, and you probably have to end there. Start with your integrity, end with your integrity. Everything in the middle is strategy. The second thing that really stood out to me is that you were, for someone that has accomplished as much as you have and has done some amazing things, you were eager to be coached. I mean, I remember the conversations you and I had, and there was no, hey, Mr. Zlotnitsky, sit back. Who the hell do you think you are? You were eager to pick my brain and get as much as you could. And I think that goes back to this concept of mentorship, which I think, as you said, is invaluable. If you're in a position where someone is willing to tell you or share with you things that are potentially going to help you, the best thing you could do is keep your mouth closed for a minute and listen. And I was very impressed with how well you listened. So I want to just call that out.
Sorry, go ahead, PJ.
No. I was just going to say, Tal, just on the side note, brand new T-shirt coming out. You start with integrity, you end with integrity. Everything else in the middle is strategy. Brilliant. Very, very nice. Very nice.
Thank you. I just came up with it.
Yeah, I know.
I'm going to use that. That's very good. One of my commanders that I highly respected, he always told me, never compromise your integrity. That's the only thing you can't get back. And so, Tal, I agree with you 100%. And the other part of it too, for me, when it comes to the integrity and being transparent, I know that being overly transparent is a risk, right? I know that's a risk. But you know what? I think the risk of not being transparent is much greater. And so, I've always erred on the side of share as much information with the people that you trust as you can, because no, people can't help you if you're not sharing that information. You can't feed people bits of information and hope to get anything in return that's truly going to help you accomplish your goals. And I'm one of those people where my brain is, I do take a little bit of time to make decisions because my brain just sits on stuff and sits on stuff. And what I found in my entrepreneurial journey is there's somebody out there that's already been through this. There's somebody out there that's already got the answer. And so you could spend the next 3 days driving yourself crazy and stress levels through the roof, or you can just ask people the question. And I've been fortunate enough to be surrounded by people that almost always have answers to those questions. But I found that if I don't open myself up to them, you know, it just makes it easier for them to open themselves up to me if I'm being the same way. And business changes so much, and you guys know this. Like the tech landscape is changing every day. We've got so many things we're dealing with now with generative AI and all these different advancements. If you're not communicating and talking and being open about the things you do know and you don't know, I don't know how you survive in this new world of business, to be honest with you. There's no more designing washing machines in the back rooms at GE and hoping that when you release it in 2 years, it's a massive hit. You're just not going to succeed in this world that way.
And so you kind of touched on leveraging networks, right? Like reaching out, being transparent, being open, and accepting mentorship or good ideas, or at least just passing advice from people that have gone through it. Is there a moment that you've had where like your network played a crucial role in overcoming obstacles on your journey?
Oh, PJ, once a week. I mean, literally once a week. If you could see my chats on my phone, as you and you both of you know this, but as you do this longer, you get more comfortable in your decision making.
Sure.
But even though I've become more comfortable in my decision making, especially in the tech space with the new company, I'll give you an example. My first company, it took me 5-6 months to get that thing stood up. My new company, I think we stood it up in 4 days. So that's the learning curve, right? There's so many more things about business I'm much more confident about. But even now, even when I know that I'm pretty confident about a decision, I still reach out to a handful of people to bounce it off of them, because you just don't know. It's not that I may be making the wrong decision. It also may be that there's some things happening in the industry, or there may be some new technological advancements you're not taking into consideration. And so I don't think as entrepreneurs we should ever get so comfortable that we don't think we need somebody's advice or that we don't need somebody's help, because it's impossible to have your finger on the pulse of everything that's happening in your space or in your market at any given time. And if you fall into that trap and you become that person, I suspect you probably won't be around very long.
It brings to mind a statement that Blaine Bartlett, a former guest of ours, the #1 international bestseller, author of Compassionate Capitalism, and he framed out for us how he felt people should go about thinking through decisions and intersections in their career or in their company. And he said, start with, for the sake of what am I doing this? And then think 2 or 3 iterations forward. And, when I came into your orbit, I was brought in by an investor who was looking at investing in your company. He'd given me all the documents of that previous transactions. I didn't know you. I came into the meeting having reviewed it and having found all these things that were very problematic in it. And I wasn't sure what kind of a CEO would be sitting across from me. PJ, I didn't have to point out any of them because Buddy pointed them out in the room. He didn't wait for me, the consultant, to say, well, there's this and there's that and then there's this. He said, let me tell you essentially where the problems are. And that mindset, that approach, I find that incredibly disarming, and it raises my level of confidence and trust in the person that's sitting across from me 100-fold immediately.
Yeah. If someone's accountable, right? They're taking accountability for whatever, and doing it in an honest way, it takes away any of the potential gotcha moments, and it just makes it a level playing field. All right, great. Here's the foundation. Let's build from there.
Well, and what's interesting about that is because I pointed some of those things out to Tal, he was able to jump to the things that I wasn't aware of, or to provide some additional substance in the areas that I didn't have a depth of knowledge. And so it actually maximized our time together, I think. And it instead of, so, and as an entrepreneur, and part of that, I'd be lying if I didn't say this, as an entrepreneur, right? It's like your legal team. The more time they spend talking with you, the more money you're spending, right? So the part of it is, if I can explain to you what I think the problem is and where I think the issues are, well, then what your expertise is, you can come in and help me with the areas where I'm not as smart, or maybe see some things I'm just not seeing. And so I think, Tal, I remember at the end of that, not the end of the conversation, as I started kind of pointing things out, you started expanding on some of those and brought some things to light that, I hadn't even considered. And so it was a very beneficial conversation for me in that regard.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Thank you. And it started a friendship, which I'm even prouder of. Let's switch gears. I want to talk about your current venture, Indago. You have this vision, and I think for the sake of our audience, it might be useful to understand what is open source human intelligence. So maybe you can define that a little bit. But open source human intelligence is out there. I think we're all aware of the fact that the internet pertains almost everything, and there's also something called the dark internet or the dark web, where even more information exists. Help people understand what it is that where is this data, this deep web well of data that folks like you can leverage for the benefit of law enforcement and business in ways that, maybe people that don't have your background and don't quite understand what you understand wouldn't be able to do.
It's a really good question. So there's open source intelligence, and that's a government term. The government uses that word. Most people in the private sector really don't know what that is. But if I were explaining it to somebody in the private sector, it's basically whatever you can search for on Google. It's publicly available data. That's basically it. Now there's different levels of the internet. There's the surface web, which are things that when you put in a search in Google and it pops up, that's considered essentially the surface web. Now I've taught classes on this for weeks. So to some of your listeners who are savvy OSINTers, they're going to say, well, that's not exactly what it is. So just know I'm speaking at a very macro level here. So there's what you search for on the internet. That's considered publicly available data. That's mostly in the OSINT space. Then there's also this dark web. And the dark web is essentially where you use like a Tor browser to access a marketplace or marketplaces that require anonymization to access those. That's where the dark web is. And the dark web, you hear the horror stories. That's where drugs are sold, guns are sold, kids are sold, all these different things. It's certainly not as sexy, as I think most people believe it is, or lead other people to believe. But what I tell people is, think about this. When you go to a website on the internet, the surface internet, it's beautiful, it's shiny, they're tracking your clicks, they're tracking everything you're looking at. So there's a lot of back end to that website. Well, in the dark web, think about it as like a flea market in a third world country. They set them up for 2 or 3 days to sell a few drugs or sell a few guns, and then they tear them down, and then they move on. So those websites are not nearly as sexy, and they can't be up for too long, because if they do, law enforcement will probably find out who they are. So that's the two separate pieces of data there, the surface web and the dark web. And so with the advancement of the internet and fiber optic cable and all this data that's on the internet, there's a lot of statistics out there about this stuff. But the bottom line is, we've just got access to so much data now on the internet. It creates a lot of ethical issues and privacy concerns, right? Because how people are accessing this data. And so there's a minefield there when you're in the open source intelligence space and collecting that data. But yeah, so people are realizing, businesses are realizing that the data that's available on the internet, whether it harms your business, helps your business, is extremely important. So OSINT as a discipline is growing. Now, I will tell you, our new business isn't in the OSINT space anymore. We do leverage publicly available data, but somebody could argue that if you do a Google search using Google operators, or dorks, what the OSINT community refers to, well, you're doing OSINT. Well, then that means basically everybody in America is in the OSINT business, which arguably,
I don't know about that, but I'm definitely a dork. I may or may not be in the OSINT. Yeah.
Now I found my tribe.
There you go.
There you go.
there's a ton of classes out there, a lot of free classes too on how to become an OSINTer.
A
But
dork.
there's not much you can't. Yeah, exactly. There's not much you can't
I already,
find online.
you know what? I had that covered at 12 years old.
Yeah, I was gonna say it comes naturally to me.
Yeah. It's interesting. It does. What I'm finding in the world of intelligence, especially OSINT, this thing comes, it comes easier to younger generations. I mean, the average child or the average kid now is being exposed to more data in 3 days on this device, their devices, than an adult in their entire lifetime prior to 1970. So think about what that's doing to their brains.
Well, I just want to be clear that I was not claiming when I was laying stake to the word dork, I didn't mean that I had those things covered. I just meant literally dork.
Think of high school dork.
PJ, you're right there, right? Yeah.
Oh,
okay.
yeah,
I was just making sure. I think we were both we were seeing eye to eye, but I think Buddy assumed we meant that we had some advanced capabilities.
This is what happens
which we do not have. For the record, we do not. Anyway, go on, Buddy.
Yeah. So the new business. You gave me an idea. I was just reading this morning that one of Elon Musk's company is now implanting smart devices inside the body, implantable devices. So maybe you could get one of those implanted, and you get those dork leg skills. That would make you a full dork, I guess. Complete dork. But that was a dad joke.
No, I like that. That's another shirt.
Yep.
I'm a complete dork, but in a good way.
Full circle.
In small print. Yeah.
So the new company, the way we've built it is, one of my other passions is information disorder. And under that is disinformation and misinformation. And I strongly believe that the faster that we can get the truth to people, truth to government officials, truth to decision makers, the less of a gap that our adversaries have to take advantage of our society. And so with our new technology, it really sets out to do two things. One, it significantly decreases the amount of time it takes somebody to write a report, whether that's an intelligence professional or a paralegal at a law firm. It decreases that time significantly. Right now, the average analyst is spending over 6 hours just writing and generating reports. We want to get that down to under an hour. Secondly, we're leveraging and building secure communications to language models to significantly enhance the quality of the report writing. When I was in the government, we always had this saying that if it's not written down in a report, it never happened, which is true. But I also believe that even if it was written down and the writing sucked, or you didn't get the executive's attention in the executive summary, you've wasted a lot of your time, because it really doesn't matter what you did. And so we have this real challenge, I think, in both the government and the private sector, where writing reports is becoming more difficult because we have so much more data to access, but the quality of those reports are deteriorating because we have so much data. And so our platform sets out to decrease the amount of time they write reports while significantly increasing the quality. We're actually creating we're patenting a readability score where people that use our platform, like Grammarly sort of does with grammar checks, it tells you your Grammarly score is X. We're trying to build the same thing with readability. And so on our platform, we're leveraging generative AI and multiple secure connections to language models to increase the user's ability to write a report that people are actually going to read and pay attention to. So that's my second passion. If you go back to even the Roman Empire, the thing that destroyed these great nations wasn't, in most cases, wasn't going to war with a foreign nation. It was the fabric of their society started to deteriorate, and echo chambers were born. Now we have this thing called social media that's made that a lot easier. And so our hope with our platform is that we can put tools into the hands of people that can make decisions faster.
A lot easier for people seeking to pass misinformation, a lot harder for those trying to slow their spread and combat them. I assume that's what you mean.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I could give a bunch of examples, but when an event happens here in the US now, or a major protest occurs, our adversaries are on those events very, very quickly and spreading rumors and even buying ads to amplify those to people that are most likely going to listen to and amplify those messages. And so, if we can create a piece of technology that puts truth into the hands of not just the average American, but decision makers, and we close that gap where our adversary has time to operate, I believe that the long-term impact could be significant because, the American experiment, so to speak, it's, I think it's, most people believe this. I know I do, that the United States isn't going to deteriorate or collapse because we lose a war. It's going to collapse and deteriorate because Americans lose their sense of purpose and sense of community. And the two things that really hit at both of those is disinformation. And so we're trying to.
Some would say that is already well, it's in motion, if not approaching a potential point of no return. And I'm very curious. Well, first, I wholeheartedly agree with you that history does repeat itself, and it's time and again we've seen great societies fail, and it's almost always an inside job. And what's very disconcerting to me, as someone that loves this country, which is not my country of birth, but it is my home, and I consider myself an American, is that there are a lot of Americans that are cynical enough to know better, but willing to push buttons, the impact of which on this great country is either predictably bad or uncertain. And as I see that happen, whether it's people in media, people in politics, we don't need to name any names. I think many people in the audience will draw their own conclusions. It is capitalizing on a human frailty, which is our tendency to look for simple answers and simple explanations for very complex issues. Unfortunately, most people would rather believe a conspiracy theory than sit down and hear the 4 bullet point explanation with the 16 sub bullet points that will actually help them understand what's going on. How do you deal in this world we're in? I mean, look, reality is we are where we are. It's going to get in many ways harder with generative AI. It's going to become easier for people who seek to spread misinformation to do so. And with some of the generative AI and AI around imagery, it's going to become easier to manipulate images and create even greater challenges and conspiracies. How do you not, I mean, you seem to me to still be an optimist. Maybe I'm misreading that. How do you retain your optimism in the face of this onslaught of, I don't know, I don't even know what to call it. Let's just call it an onslaught, which is how I often feel. I consume a lot less news than I used to because it became entirely overwhelming, and it's not clear to me how we as a society deal with that. Thank God for people like you who are not deterred, I believe. But tell me, how do you, if you do retain your optimism, how do you do that? On what basis?
It's a great question. I'm actually very optimistic. And I believe that it starts in the classroom. One of the areas that I've been having a lot of conversations about, one of the topics I've been having a lot of conversations about, is how do we get media literacy into the classroom? How do we get critical thinking back into the classroom? Because I think we're dealing with a generation now, a few generations actually, where we've had this explosion of technological advancements, like, Moore's Law, for example. I mean, the computer chip has advanced so quickly that people at our age, I'm speaking for myself, but I think people can relate to this. We don't know how to deal with this expansion of information and all this excessive data that we now have access to. I'll give you an example. I tell people this jokingly, but it's true. I remember being a teenager, and for the first time, my mom telling us kids, hey, there was a kid that was kidnapped in San Francisco. I forget the exact city, but there was a kid kidnapped in San Francisco. You guys need to be in before the sun goes down tonight. Well, we were living in Philadelphia. And it immediately registered in my brain, like, Mom, this has been going on forever. You just didn't have national news on the TV screen 3 days ago, right? And so I think what has happened is, because of things like the Crisis News Network, that we all now, all of the worst things happening in the world are sitting on the TV screen in front of us. And our brains, we're human beings. We move towards conflict and away from peace. That's just naturally how we're wired through evolution, right? So I think we put too much bad news in front of people, but we haven't given them the skills to critically think through and vet that information on their own. It's way too easy to just, hey, I like this guy, I believe what he's saying, therefore that must be the
So
truth.
I agree with
I'm
all
gonna
of that.
roll with it.
In light of that, where's the optimism? Where does the optimism fit in?
We got to fix the education system, right? I believe that kids nowadays, and I know a lot of parents say kids being on TikTok, Facebook, it's all bad. It is bad in a lot of different ways, especially when it comes to the exploitation of children. I'm 100% agreeing with that. But I also think because kids are being exposed to so much data now, that they're developing these skills to vet this data faster than we could, or we don't have the skills to do that. But, you know, even talking to my daughters, they can tell me very quickly, that post is crap, that post is legitimate, this is stupid. So that filter that they're developing to see what's true and what's not true, I think is increasingly improving. Whereas I didn't grow up on an iPhone. So I'm trying to learn these skills at 40 years old. Whereas, you know, kids are learning this stuff at 12 and 13. And so that's where my optimism lies. And I do believe that here in America and in our friendly countries that we work closely with, I believe that we have systems and governments in place, while not perfect, that will solve these problems. It's going to take some time. It's not going to happen overnight. But I do think if enough people start talking about it, and I think they are, that we'll come up with solutions. Because at the end of the day, we don't want America to collapse. We don't want to see that. And there are cynical people out there, but I think those cynical people will be overshadowed by the people that have these critical thinking skills. But like I said, I think it's got to get back to the classroom. Or, I mean, you guys see this all the time. Homeschooling is on the rise. I mean, here in Florida, I mean, every couple, I'd say, you know, not empirical data here by any means, but, you know, every 2 or 3 out of 5 kids I know are now being homeschooled. And so, you know, parents are bringing kids back into the home to not make them susceptible to some of these things. And so we'll see where it goes, but I do think it starts in the classroom and critical thinking.
So it sounds like your optimism. First of all, I think statistically, I'm certain that number wouldn't hold. I don't think it's 2 to 3 out of 5, but maybe 2 to 3 out of 100, and maybe that number is rising. Sorry, I don't know. But I would say that if I'm hearing you correctly, your optimism is rooted in a generation that's coming that is more savvy with technology and better perhaps than we are at breaking down whether something is logical and can be true or isn't. And, you know, as a father to 3 adults, my youngest is 20, I concur. I do think that the generation to come and the generation that's rising is on many levels superior to us. I think, you know, it's interesting because usually, it's more common for historically for people to lament the coming generation. I think the generation to come will save us. The question is, what will we be leaving them? I mean, you said, and I agree that you know, we need government. But let's talk about AI. You know, I'm a co-signer to a letter that was circulated a few months ago, and there's actually a new letter that's being circulated by the group today, calling on all involved parties, government, business, academia, to get together and regulate generative AI before it transforms our society in ways we simply cannot predict. And I'm going to get off my soapbox because people are not here to hear me. They'd rather hear you. But I would say that it is unfortunate that one of the legacies of what we've seen happen through media manipulation and other unfortunate things over the last 20 or so years is there's been a massive erosion in confidence in government, which ultimately could come back and bite us in the ass. I mean, if we can't find a way to get people to believe that at its core, government is made up of what? It's made up of people. It's made up of Americans like you and me who go to work every day at agencies, thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of them. And their mission is not to assist some conspiracy. It's to serve America and serve our serve our values. And the sooner we get back to a place where we remember that, the more our odds of surviving this very uncomfortable time in our history are. And you know what? I am an optimist, and yet I'm deeply worried. And I'm grateful that there are people like you that are working to put the right tools in the hands of people that need those tools in order to protect us.
Yeah, it's a very interesting conversation because there's so many aspects to the conversation, right? So, like advancements in healthcare because of generative AI are astounding. Advancements to safety are incredible. I just saw a statistic the other day that self-driving cars are now safer, that they just crossed that threshold where self-driving cars are now safer than cars being driven by humans. That's incredible. The other thing is they've just started merging supercomputers with generative AI, and what they're learning so quickly, they can't get it out fast enough. And so, in terms of longevity, in terms of personal safety, I think GAI is doing some incredible things. But you're right, when it comes to, the manipulation of generative AI, that's a gray area. And the problem for the US government, I think, at a high level, and we could get really deep into this, but at a high level is, I agree that we need to regulate it. That's going to take time. I don't necessarily agree that we need to slow down because, when Sam Altman released OpenAI, which is, was a nonprofit that is now becoming a for-profit, which I'm not sure how that happens, but once that becomes a for-profit, God only knows who's going to have access to this stuff. But our adversaries aren't slowing down, and so that's a conundrum that the U.S. government is now in. We can slow it down, we could regulate it in America, but we can't regulate it in some of these other countries. And because we don't know the risk that's involved, and we don't, I don't believe that generative AI anytime soon is going to become its own being, a sentient creature that's going to make its own decisions. But I don't know that for sure.
You don't need sentience. I mean, I agree with you, and we're going to get back on the topic of business, and I hope we haven't lost our audience in its entirety, and hopefully it's interesting. What do you think, PJ? Is this an interesting conversation?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'll close with business, of course, but I mean,
okay,
it's all relative, right? We all have wants and desires for our society to be better and act better. There's a specter of AI. A lot of us don't understand it. There's tons of statistics out there that are great and some are terrible. So it is interesting to go over it, and and I'll say proof of concept. I know for a fact that the generative AI probably is better. Those self-driving cars are probably better because I got teenagers, and I guarantee you it's better. So I think it's an interesting conversation for sure. I think that we could probably spend a Joe Rogan type of conversation on all of this because there's a lot to unhatch. But
there is.
I do think it's.
Well, I'll finish with one quick thought, and then we could pivot back, and then we'll close with our traditional last question. I would just say that there's no doubt that AI, generative AI, and all AI has the potential to change the world in deeply positive and meaningful ways. Absolutely, the amount of data that can be reviewed for the benefit of science in particular is unbelievable. I also believe that we have in the world have shown the ability to come together globally, as we just did on some level with COVID and previously. And I know vaccination, for reasons I don't understand, is a controversial topic, but we've come together globally to eradicate disease by enacting certain protocols. And I think AI is one of these moments in history. Generative AI, not AI in general, generative AI. And if you don't know what it is, go to OpenAI. I think it's openai.com now. I don't think it's .org anymore. And kick the tires on ChatGPT, and you'll be literally ask it any question. I'm not talking one question. Ask it a 10-dimensional question, that involves information that perhaps you've spent your entire life learning, and watch with amazement as it gives you oftentimes stunningly detailed and, generally speaking, very accurate information. Yes, there are some hallucinations, but I would just say, in closing there, it is going to become increasingly harder for good guys like you to protect us and ensure our continuance as a civilization if we don't take some measures. And I think the time to take those measures is now. And I'm talking, when I say now, I mean, we basically maybe have an 18 to 24 month window before this genie can never get back in the bottle. And it behooves us to be very mindful of that. PJ, I'll kick it back to you to take us back to business.
Oh, geez. Thanks, man.
Fun.
So just really quickly, clearly you have, there's a couple of cores to you, right? I mentioned you have a huge heart, which is apparent. You have the moniker of integrity that you carry around with you. You also clearly have a strong moral compass. Have you navigated any ethical considerations on the entrepreneurial side that have influenced, or how have they influenced your business decisions using that compass?
So I always, it's a great question. I actually have a mentor who it's funny you use the term moral compass. I tell him all the time, like, he is my moral compass. Every time I even start to think about things that I think violate my integrity, he's the first person I call him. We've had hours-long conversations about, decisions I was planning to make, and he does a very good job of sort of explaining to me why those are not good decisions, or why that could compromise my integrity or not have the lasting impact. And I think most times when people compromise their integrity, it's for short gains, and what they're risking is the long-term effects of maintaining your integrity. And so, I can't think, I don't think I personally, I've done anything to, when it comes to like making day-to-day decisions, what I try to stick to is the team. Because if I wind up selling a couple of businesses and becoming very rich, well, if I'm by myself on a hill with all that money, what does it matter? Right? That's not why I got into this. I've built a great team. I've got an incredible team of investors. I've got a great board, and I've got some good people around me. And so, the decisions I make, it's for them. And I do think through that all the time. And I do that exercise in my brain. If I make this decision, how does it affect my COO? How does it affect my director of marketing? How does this affect my board? How does this affect my investors? And I realize that not every decision is going to make everybody happy. There's something, you've got to take some risk there. But I think I've been pretty fortunate in the fact that I've never made a decision that really hurt the people that I cared about or the people that were helping me grow my business. I'm not saying I won't down the road. And of course, I've not owned or run big businesses. The most employees we've had is probably, just around 35, 40. So that's a relatively small.
That's a big business. I mean, I know it's not a large business in the definitional sense, but that's a lot more people than many people have.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people's livelihood that you're responsible for.
Well, I guess I appreciate that. Well, I guess what does make me nervous is when you look at, these CEOs of 1,000-person companies. I mean, I'm always hesitant when people say this CEO is a bad CEO, and I'm thinking, like, do you realize how many decisions that person has to make? And do you think they have the time to sit around and think about all 32,000 employees' perspective of his decision? And so I guess what I'm saying is it's been manageable where I've been. It's certainly not manageable when you get to those levels, and so that makes me a little nervous as our company grows.
I'm going to steal. Go ahead, PJ. Sorry.
So one real quick thing. We don't know each other very well, buddy. But I will say, if you ever find yourself down and you're feeling downtrodden and you just have this large amount of money that you don't know what to do with, please call me. And I'll be happy.
He's very good. And he's taking money off of every guest. I mean, we had a guest yesterday who sold a company for $500 million, and PJ shamelessly said, he'll take 499 million of that.
No. I was just going to borrow.
And
that.
me being the modest guy I am, I said, I'll take the other million. You see, I'm so reasonable.
True.
Yeah, Buddy, I'll steal. It's usually PJ that asks this last question, but since we're running out of time, I will go ahead and do that. With all of your experiences, everything you've learned, everything you've done in your incredible and very interesting career, if you could offer one piece of advice, one thing, we've had some guests that have insisted on making it 3, but I'd really rather it was one piece of advice you'd give our listeners. They are budding entrepreneurs, or maybe they're thinking about becoming an entrepreneur. What would be the one piece of advice that maybe you wish someone had told you about, or that you think they should start from?
Yeah. We live in America, right? And not just America. There's a lot of other countries that are doing very well economically.
About a third of our audience, actually, for the record, about a third of our audience is outside of America. We've got a big following in Europe, surprisingly,
Good.
Especially in the UK. But nevertheless, continue with your point.
So no, my advice would be to just go for it. Like we live in a time of abundance. We live in a time where there are so many programs to help you if you make a mistake. One of my mentors, who I love and value, he's beat cancer 5 times, just an incredible human being. He always told me one of the most incredible things our forefathers did is they created bankruptcy, right? And the reason they created bankruptcy is because if you are ethical and you do the right thing and you make a mistake, we've gotten away from debtor's prison. We've created this mechanism to help you get back on your feet, so you get that second, that third, that fourth chance. Now, clearly people weaponize bankruptcy, and I'm not talking about people that intentionally do those things. But what I'm saying is, if you live in the United States or one of these countries, just go for it. I promise you, in the long term, you will be grateful. Even if you have to go back to your desk job, you will be so much more experienced and have so much more knowledge about how business works. I'll share this last thing with you real quick. I think it's kind of important. In 2000, just before 2011, 9/11, I was working at the Pentagon, and I would brief. I didn't brief a lot. I don't want to give anybody the impression like these are one-on-one briefs, but I attended a brief with Secretary Rumsfeld at the time. And every now and then I would have to get up and speak to a specific topic. And it was generally like 5 or 6 seconds. So it wasn't a big deal. But I was sitting next to him one day, and I asked him, and at the time I was a contractor, and I asked him, I said, "Hey, sir, how do you become the Secretary of Defense?" And I thought his answer was incredible. He said, "If you want to be the Secretary of Defense, you've got to get away from the government. You've got to get other experience. You're not going to become Secretary of Defense by working your way up as a government civilian or being in the military." Now, that's changed, obviously. We've had General Mattis in office, and he kind of did it that way.
And General Austin now.
Yeah. General Austin now.
Your point's well taken.
But the point was, he said, if you really, and I said, I want to be SecDef, right? What else do you say to the SecDef? I want your job in 20 years. And he said, "Buddy, if you want to do that, you need to get away from the government. You need to understand business. You need to start a business. You need more worldly experience to do this job effectively." And so, that stuck with me. And so that's why I tell people, even if you fail miserably over the next 3 years building a business, go for it, because the knowledge you're going to gain in doing so is going to make you so much better at whatever it is you do decide to do if you give up on the entrepreneurial journey. So, I mean, we have a very short time on this earth, very short time. What better thing, what better risk to take than going out and starting a business? To me, is just an incredible opportunity. And by the way, we have the ability to do this. There are so many people in the world that they can't even fathom the idea of starting a business because the infrastructure is not there, the economy is not there, the government. So this is a real blessing to live in a place where you can go take risks, start a business, lose almost everything, and still get back on your feet.
Well, without a doubt, and your optimism oozes, and I mean that in a positive sense, out of you, which is great. And I want to be clear, I'm an optimist as well. I actually do believe that enough people of goodwill and good character and high morals will come together and are coming together to lead us to a better tomorrow. If I have the opportunity to be involved, I try to be, and I encourage everyone that's in the audience to do the good work folks like Buddy do. Take whatever it is, wherever it is in your world that you can make an impact. It doesn't have to be sex traffickers. Make that impact. It's another T-shirt, I think. Just go for it. I know it sounds a little like just do it, but it's not. It's just go for it. And I think that's well said. I mean, ultimately, the biggest barrier to success for a lot of people is their own self-confidence and their ability to just press on in the face of adversity. And this podcast is entirely about perseverance and resilience. There isn't one person on this planet that has done something worthwhile that didn't, in the process of getting there, run into obstacle after obstacle. And the only difference between them and the people that made that attempt that didn't quite get to that mountaintop is that they didn't quit.
Yeah, Tal, and I'd just like to say, if you're an entrepreneur out there and you're facing challenges, I promise you, you're not the first one to face that challenge. So don't bring that stuff inside. Build a network, maintain your integrity. There's somebody in your network, I promise you. And if not, give me a call, email me, I'll connect you with somebody. But I promise you, there's somebody out there that has dealt with the problem that you think is going to destroy your business or going to slow you down. That's the beauty of this. You don't have to do it alone. And so those networks of mentors are so, so important. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that.
Our guest today was an incredible guy, Buddy Jericho. Sounds like G.I. Joe. He's a bit of an action hero to me. Buddy, it's been a true honor, privilege. It's an honor and a privilege to be your friend. I value that more than I value your business acumen, because I value you as a human being. But I think that you shared a tremendous amount of wisdom that will benefit people's lives. And of course, since they came on to hear about how to benefit their business and how to grow as entrepreneurs, that as well. So I thank you for being with us today. And we look forward to hearing more about this journey with Indago. I think I know that things are going well. I know that you're beginning to get some traction and getting some great investors. And I look forward to watching you on this journey, which I'm sure will be successful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tal. Yeah, thank you, PJ. Thank you, Tal. I appreciate your friendship as well. I appreciate you guys. And I really, really appreciate the opportunity to be on here and share my story. So thank you for that.